So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the coffee. We're going to move on to our next session, which is Industry and Innovation Collaborating for Success. So over the next 40 minutes, we're going to focus on unlocking growth in the UK space sector and how industry can turn innovation and new technologies into world-leading space capabilities through collaboration and cooperation. So as part of that, we're also going to be looking at how to best deliver the national space strategy by working with government bodies, defence and international partners to really try and unleash the UK's potential. So I'm really pleased to be joined by experts from right across the space spectrum. Please welcome, first of all, you heard from him a little earlier, Mark Roberts, Chair of the Air and Space Power Association. Mark is a retired Air Commodore in the RAF. He was the Director of Air Staff with responsibility for space and cyber policy in his portfolio, and also head of capability for deep target attack. He became later project director for Spaceport One and now runs a space sector startup, Gravity Lab Aerospace Services. So Mark, do you want to take a seat first of all? Thank you. And we'll hear from Mark at the top of the panel. Also, please do welcome Dr. Matthew Broadhead. Matt is the Technology Strategy Leader and Chief Consultant for Space at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, Dstl, which is based at Portsdown West near Portsmouth. He's published research on cross-cutting issues such as deterrence, mission assurance and space warfare. So please do welcome, do take a seat. Lovely to have you with us, Matt. Also, Michael O'Callaghan, Dr. Michael O'Callaghan is Head of Future Programmes for Airbus, Defence and Space UK. He has a lot of experience across a diverse range of roles within both the public and private sector, working across industry and academia, because for 15 years he was at the MOD's Defence Science and Technology Lab. So do welcome Michael O'Callaghan. And David Pyle is the Regional Director of the United Kingdom, Europe and the Middle East for Northrop Grumman Space Systems. He leads the connectivity between customers and suppliers with business delivery teams in the United States. And he's a former British Army officer as well, and he's held various other roles right across the aerospace sector. So please do welcome David Pyle. Thank you. But first, to kick off this session, as we did for the last session, we're going to hear a bit of an impulse statement from Mark Roberts, just to kind of set the scene and get the conversation going. So please do, over to you.
Thank you, Susanna. It's a great pleasure to introduce the industry session, and I should probably point out that I am wearing the hat of somebody who runs a 25-strong SME in terms of this session. Forgive me, I am script-bound, but I will hopefully make it as painless as possible. It will not surprise you, perhaps, because the last session strayed into a lot of the industry issues, that there's a fair amount of repetition here. I'm going to sort of slightly put a positive flavour on that and say some common themes are appearing, but let's see how we go. So the last session, correctly in my view, advocated that a joined-up collaborative approach to strategic delivery of space is important. I would actually argue it's essential. It was very pleasing to see the government departments talking the same language, and I take great heart that there is a genuine will to seek a coherent strategic future for this vital sector. This session is intended to link directly to the last by offering an industry view and essentially underline our deep desire for greater collaboration going forward, and that is a theme I'll keep returning to. I'm also keen to perhaps challenge the conventional wisdom about industry's motivation, role, contribution to the collective drive for success in the space sector. In the context of defence, it would be easy and rather typical to simply focus on procurement and make the rather hackneyed point that traditional acquisition processes are woefully inadequate at providing capability at the pace of contemporary need. However, while this is true, I would like to open the box a little more and discuss how industry, especially in the space sector, is genuinely desperate to support national space endeavour and its successful delivery. I'm going to argue that industry has a crucial role at every step of the capability cycle. We can solve problems if those problems are shared. Indeed, industry may already, and this was alluded to earlier, Industry may already have solutions to some of the challenges we face, and we can certainly deliver at pace. I will also posit that success can and will be born of truly symbiotic relationships between government and industry. So I'd like to start talking about working collaboratively. Now, this may cause some in the room to bristle, but I would reflect that until relatively recently, the government's interpretation of good collaboration on strategy with industry in this sector has been defined by delivering one-way seminars and consultation surveys. Take the development of space legislation and regulation as an example. Government refused wider industry support, choosing instead to periodically brief on industry on progress. This was not a discussion, and the responses to industry challenge were routinely inhibited because of legal concerns. I argued at the time and continue to hold the view that this denied legislators the very expertise that they needed to access. Whilst the skills to actually pen the legislation and regulation rightly sat with government, the knowledge of space did not. And not engaging with industry, for example, to scenario test the regulation was a missed opportunity. Now, I am not knocking those who staffed the work. It was a fabulous effort you'd be surprised how small the team was, a very small team to deliver such complex work. I'm merely highlighting that convention prevented the type of collaboration that would have benefited both sides. So what do we want better collaboration? Each of my fellow speakers will offer a view, I'm sure. What I would highlight the following. Most of industry in this sector are innovating, whether that is capabilities, systems, processes, components, operations, or the manufacturing methods used. Does government really know what it has access to? Indeed, does industry truly know what the government sees in the future, especially when it pertains to resilience and/or sovereignty? I would contend that we could and should be doing better. This is an oft-cited issue, and it was mentioned earlier several times, but there are systemic barriers to SMEs engaging, and this effectively denies the strength and true depth of the space sector to the government. I will leave it to others on the panel to comment, but I wonder if the primes also find the process of pushing new and novel capabilities unnecessarily tortuous. My point is that deeper engagement and collaboration at all levels will reveal and stimulate exactly the type of innovation that all strategies call for, while offering mutual benefit and a much better direction of travel towards growth and prosperity. Now, I would reflect that Dstl have made a cracking start on this, but I suspect that bandwidth almost certainly prevents the depth and breadth that I believe is available and wanted. Industry can and indeed wants to move at pace. Again, you'll have heard this before many times, but why is the comparatively agile UOR process the exception? Sure, huge geostationary satellites and systems are not delivered overnight and are arguably able to exist in the sluggish acquisition process. But what of smaller, agile, and adaptable capabilities that could be placed in orbit very quickly, perhaps in response to events and with the latest technological advances on board? I was fortunate to do some work with the Pentagon a few years ago at the end of the noughties on the concept of responsive space, and our conclusions of that work might help make my point. We sought to understand whether capabilities could be launched very rapidly after the need was identified and a capability specified. In other words, and by way of example, could a commander issue an order to have an EO system with specific sensor capability, providing coverage of a specifically defined area in a few days? The answer, we believed, was yes, but that required an extremely close collaboration with launch, satellite, and component suppliers to ensure that the right systems and assembly capabilities were on the shelf. We also recognize that we require a very imaginative acquisition approach that supported a near total reliance on industry for contingent strategic capability and the needs to continuously seed R&D. Putting aside the acquisition element, the key points were that the customer collaborated closely at every stage of the capability lifecycle. with the quid pro quo that industry provided interoperable systems that were bespoke to the requirement. Also, through continuous seeding of R&D, the capability delivered was not only up to date, but collaboratively considered at lower TRLs. While perhaps an extreme example, hopefully this has hinted at the potential value and power of collaboration at all stages of the capability lifecycle, and how industry can be vital and an enthusiastic contributor to delivering capability at pace. Now, you might not buy this, or those in industry will, but I would advocate that the space industry is innately altruistic when it comes to future success and growth. Yes, we have shareholders. Yes, we need to make money. But of course, we all see the value of a vibrant, growing, and enduring space sector, and these motivations are completely compatible with our commercial goals. I would add that the space industry already collaborates internally, perhaps more than is understood. Many companies, especially in the SME realm, share knowledge, concepts, and solutions. An industry is configured and comfortable to work collaboratively and would welcome that collaboration growing to truly embrace government. Industry also recognizes the benefit of overall sector growth, primarily because growth means opportunity, and when the space sector is an ecosystem of companies, when there is growth within the ecosystem of companies, that's likely to bring benefits to others. Put another way, growth works for us just as much as it does for the wider economy. In summary, I'm firmly of the view that for real and optimal success in the space endeavour, industry needs government and government needs industry. Therefore, our noble aim moving forward is to find that symbiosis that gets affordable capability to the front line, but at all times drives growth. Industry's contribution is PV, knowledge, and the skills to provide the innovation, technological developments, and manufacturing to provide fieldable capabilities our nation requires. Government's contribution is to define the strategic need, the ambition, the priorities, and provide handrails to guide industry towards our collective goals. Now, even as I've described it there, I fall into the trap of making it sound like a transactional activity, but I'm not advocating that at all. We can develop strategy together. We can define roadmaps together. We can work hand in hand on investment, and we can iteratively develop capabilities together, and we can certainly operate capabilities in a symbiotic way. Some might call that dual use, and we've been doing it for a very long time. The bottom line is that industry is up for this, indeed has lobbied for greater collaboration in the space endeavour for years, and in my utopian world, it would be great to see this conference as a firm step in the direction of making that collaboration happen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. So, Matt, it was great to hear Mark refer to the fact that you've been doing a cracking job in some respects, but he also talked about the fact that it's a bit of a one-way street in terms of the government briefing industry and not the other way around. What do you make of that?
I see that picture, and I was reflecting on the level of conversations we've had with industry, specifically through a technology lens, I suppose, as I've seen it since about 2015. And we started from a position of almost a level naught of conversation in certain areas. Certain areas were more mature than others, but it was a case of industry would say, what do you want? And mob would say, what have you got? And it was almost a broken loop, because there was very little capability in Dstl, no program, there was no Space Command, no Space Directorate, little capability in DNS outside of SATCOM. So that was the first level of conversation. Moving forward to sort of where I think we are now, and I'd be interested in the perspective of the industry participants here. We're sort of a level of conversation where it can feel like a broadcast type situation. And three things were mentioned in panel one. Effectively information that already exists out there, things like the cross-government space domain awareness requirements, a lot of effort went into that. They're available now on the internet, and it's a conversation. Yes, it's just information broadcast, but it's something we weren't doing 2-3 years ago. And it's completely outside any specific procurement, which is an interesting approach. I think we can do more like that for things like ISR, for example. The highly assured capabilities list, what needs to be sovereign, what needs to be assured, what needs to be accessible in the UK from a defence perspective is a good start. It's sort of squirreled away at the back of the Defence Command Plan refresh, but that is a start, and that will evolve, I think. That's another important one. And the third one is how Serapis is developed under Lot 2. I remember starting to write the technical framework for Serapis back in 2016, and to see that evolve and grow and pick up more and more SMEs and more partners across a massive wide range of industries has been very good, very heartening, and is delivering very well under BAE leadership. So I think that's a positive for a conversation with industry on the technology side. And the final one I want to mention, because I always bang on about this, is DASA. It's great to hear Doug Little talk about it as a good way of SMEs getting access to defence. We have 7-8 years worth of defence and security accelerator calls for space going on. All that information, all those technical challenges, all that detail of what we think the problem are for mod in space technology are out there now. So just because the calls are over doesn't mean the technical detail of what we think the challenges are and what we want. That all still is on gov.uk, and those challenges aren't changing. So if you want a history of where Dstl think the challenges are for mod, that's a really good resource to have. And so looking forward to the future, where does the level 2 conversation lie? And I suppose if I look around this room and I aggregate PV, the internal research and development activities of all the companies here, it probably dwarfs mod's investment by at least 1, if not 2 orders of magnitude. So how do we have a more sensitive, more nuanced and focused conversation with those internal research activities in a sensitive environment, which is where Dstl is well positioned to do, to aggregate that in a focused set of key technology areas to benefit mod's future ambitions in space? That for me is where the future of the conversation is.
Okay, thank you. We'll hopefully go further there in a moment. Mike, you moved from Dstl into industry. So what do you make of what Mark pointed out? And just in general, what are your reflections on seeing these challenges from both the industry and government perspective? And what do you make of the pace of change?
So I think it's fair to say I've learned a lot in the last year. It started on day one with a bit of disappointment on a bus in Spaceport, Cornwall. So it's left me plenty to reflect on. And I will swipe with pride as well from other conferences this year and the excellent speakers that we've heard over the course of the year. And whoever's doing this panel next at DGI, Space Symposium, MIL SSA, Space Ops Summit, Spacecom Expo. I think we've got too many conferences, but anyway, that's for a different time, but it's good to continue the conversation. So reflecting on Roberta's comments, I'll start with talking about growing and about collaboration. And it's true, the barriers do make it really hard. Moving from a position of being at the end of that hose pipe of information to looking at how that is disseminated to industry, it is very difficult, and that's why we're often all here. If you miss the event, miss out in terms of the information that's presented, which is you can't guarantee you're going to see that later on down the line. And maybe that's security, maybe that's procurement regulations, maybe it's connectivity from official sensitive to top secret with industry, maybe it's just culture. Mark Bacon talked about this earlier. But there are some really good examples. We've heard about them already. I think that I've seen this year. The SSA requirements have been mentioned already. Some things that are not space, but the DNS organizational design activity that industry have been involved in. I think that was a really powerful thing to invite industry along to. Some of the multi-domain integration activities, for instance, again, have been very open. And of course, the space partnership, as we've already heard about. So there are some good examples of where defense is willing to open up and really share some of the deep thinking that's going on about the future of the organization. But what I see in industry, and Mark talked about this already, there's a lot more pragmatism. There's a lot more openness than perhaps I realized, because the pace is driven by necessity. It's driven by the time needed to respond to a statement of requirement, to an ITT. And often those are, orders of magnitude shorter than the time taken by government to actually write the requirement. So that pace has to be much faster. And, I might have been one of those in years gone by who's perhaps criticizing companies like Airbus for how they engage with small and medium-sized companies. And there's lots of initiatives going on right now that are trying to improve that. We just received funding, £3.9 million from the Space Agency for an innovation catalyst at Stevenage as part of our community for space prosperity. And actually, what that's all about is recognizing the heritage that Airbus has and owns on behalf of the UK in bringing that community together. So really very much more of a community model for engaging with SMEs, which is perhaps different to how we've done it in the past. And it recognises the UK doesn't have the luxury of duplicating specialist staff or specialist facilities that have been there for a really long time. We need to make sure those are open and available for people to use. And we heard General Gutlein at the National Security Space Week in the US talking about the deterrence of partnerships as well. And God has mentioned this in his opening speech. And that's why we've been partnering with companies as well, like Northrop Grumman, good to be on the stage with David, to bring sort of the best of both worlds, the UK expertise in Airbus to grow the ecosystem, but also the additional benefits of leveraging all of that allied investment in space capability as well. And we need to continue to look at how we can rapidly accelerate UK capability through the own collaborate access model that we hear about so often, whilst bringing that joint expertise to bear to deliver at the pace that's needed. The second thing I want to talk about, reflecting on Mark, is supporting the strategy. How are we doing that? How are we making it work? We do spend an awful lot of time talking, and I really hope that we're all going away from this and getting on with things as well. We can reflect on the defence space portfolio, £1.4 billion worth of investment. We could say space and defence did pretty well in the last integrated review with that new money, but challenges and delays in delivering against that funding have persisted. And we need to ask ourselves why that's happening. Is it a lack of industry understanding about what government wants? And we certainly speak a different language sometimes. Is it expertise in government? We've heard about that already, that there are challenges and process blockers, but it's certainly not a lack of effort on behalf of everyone in this room. But the fundamental and urgent need, and we've heard about it already, is to respond to the threats in space. We've heard about that already, and I'll come back to it in a second. But resilience of capability in the UK for protecting and defending our assets and with our allies is really important. The pace of delivering that can only really be driven by government, where we're looking at delivering national capability. The end-to-end process to deliver these capabilities is far too long, and we must be looking at ways we can shorten that process. Having government as an anchor customer can unlock growth and accelerate capability as well, whether it's from private equity, venture capital, internal R&D. And we heard from Josh earlier as well about supporting exports. We heard about the new CSPO nations as well. How are we going to work across those partner companies? I come back to the threat, though, and Deanna Riles, who I'm sure many of you heard speak this year at various conferences, has always just come back to the threat is real and it's got to motivate us. The US do talk about their clock, and by my calculation, there's now 750 days on that ticking US clock out to 2026, which has been talked about very often, and that should galvanize us to move quickly. So what are the solutions? What do I think we need to do? We've got to move at the pace of the urgent need. We're pretty good actually at doing urgent operational requirements. And if we believe that the threat is real, and I think we all do, that means we absolutely need to act now at the pace of operational need, not just developing capabilities for the next 10, 15 or 20 years. And we've seen this discussed at many of the conferences over the last few years. I think Alice Bunn summed it up really well at the Space Conference a few weeks ago now. She talked about the myth of competition in the US and in Europe, that the procurement rules that we operate against are perhaps just plain wrong, and maybe we're a bit too British about the way we go about doing things, where other nations maybe do things in a slightly different way. We heard from Josh and Mark that Mod and government are working on this, looking at the UK Space Agency BRICE procurement study. There's new procurement bill going through, the sector plan, category management. We haven't heard anything today about the Defence Space Capability Framework, but we know that's coming down the line as well. But will these things be fast enough to mitigate the threat? Will that pace endure into 2024 when we're going to see political turmoil and further defence reviews going on as well, potentially over the next 12 to 18 months? We can't necessarily wait for those things to happen. So how are we going to get after these things more quickly? So just to close, fixing procurement and working out how we get after the operational need faster is absolutely critical. And one point that was kind of agreed on a number of conferences this year was that also government anchor tenancy in order to deliver and drive these national capabilities is absolutely critical and drives investment as well into the sector. And it's great to hear from Mark that those things are hopefully coming next year. Everyone that I've heard speak this year agrees that those things are a multiplier. And I agree with that too. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Well, let me get the perspective now from David, Northrop Grumman Space Systems. So how do you think the UK should approach collaboration? What can we do better, particularly in taking this international perspective?
Sure, absolutely. And it's always the danger of going forth on a panel. Other people steal your sandwiches, so I'll pick up on a couple of points. So I think first, and as we're coming up to sort of the Christmas season, we need to celebrate. We're always really hard on ourselves, I think, in the UK, that we've got a great space industry. We've got space capabilities that our allied partners look at with some jealousy. We heard earlier that so many countries come to Space Command to ask for those, to look at those capabilities. And Skynet, the capability of Findingdales are two examples of that. And certainly as a big US prime, we employ about 1,000 people in the UK, but most of our space business is in the US. We see great innovation in the UK. You may have picked up recently, I think we announced at DSCI our work with SpaceForge. So Joss Weston and the team down in Wales are doing world-leading work there in the UK that is getting a lot of attention about manufacturing novel materials on orbit. And it's something that I think a number of the prime contractors are looking at as absolutely world-leading capability, and that's being led out of the UK. So I think coming back to collaboration and just sort of broadening it out a little bit, industry and government absolutely need to collaborate. But there's also the other players in there. So investment. A lot of the new space investment at the moment is coming from the private sector. So that's an area we need to work on. Academia, and we've got some colleagues from academia in the audience today. Again, another area which needs to be part of that collaboration. And equally, looking at space as a global business. Mike's mentioned we're teaming with Airbus. That's not just a UK thing. Space really is a global industry. And again, working with Josh from DBT, who spoke earlier, we've carried out a number of supplier events in the UK and in the US this year. And that's about finding suppliers, partners who can join with us in a global supply chain and really, as a network of allies, make our capabilities, more competitive so we win more business, absolutely, as Mark mentioned. That's what we're in business for. But also to make us more competitive against the threat. And it's a defense conference, and we should be looking at the threat. And as Mike mentioned, that's what we need to focus on. So this is about, yes, collaborating to do better business, but also collaborating to be more agile, be more resilient, and really address those threats that are facing us.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Well, we've got lots of questions to get through, not that much time. So I'm just going to go through in popularity order. Would Dstl consider driving an effort to loop together all frameworks and calls for a single portal, for example, a UKSA landing page, rather than a scattergun approach that we have currently? Matt?
This was kind of discussed yesterday in the previous panel in terms of the single front door approach. I mean, it's really, really hard to do across government. It's even hard to do within Dstl because of the nature of the commercial arrangements we have, the nature of the vast array of different work we do. And again, the most successful way we've done the single front door across Space Agency and Dstl is the DASICL. The Space Agency have co-sponsored that activity since 2013. That's before we even had a space program. We've been working in collaboration with the head of technology at UK Space Agency to shape those calls and co-fund those bids with the explicit instruction that what we do is exploitable in a dual-use context. So we don't fund things that we don't think we can exploit for the growth potential of the UK, but also of defence and security use. And as the command and DNS have matured over the years, that's become more and more closely aligned with the programs as they emerge and the requirements as they emerge and the R&D tech demonstrators as they've emerged. So I think that as a technology front door is a really good example. Dstl can't cohere the rest of MOD in terms of capability terms. That's not our role. We're kind of at the technology level, the S&T level.
Okay, and as a follow-up, some capabilities are operational now and with collaboration can be adapted to quickly. What is the risk appetite for government to use these?
Adapted, can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so some capabilities are operational now and with collaboration can also be adapted quickly. I mean, these capabilities are, they can be used straight away, but why is the government, has it got enough risk appetite to take on board these capabilities right now?
I don't think it's risk appetite. I think this is a really good question. This is where usually I've got a UK Space Command colleague next to me I can slope shoulders this question onto, but I can't do that right now. I don't think it's a case of risk appetite. I think it's a case of knowing what the capability vision is for the future and where specific solutions fit into that vision. I don't think it's a case of the appetite of just buying a solution now and doing it in an operational context, because I don't think we do that in other domains. I don't think we do that in other operational domains in terms of the physical domains of air.
What's your take on this then, David? Do you think that there is, capabilities that are there right now but not being fully exploited, and why?
It's a difficult one. I mean, looking internationally, there are lots of capabilities out there which could be exploited very quickly. But I guess coming back to sort of the reference to the UOR system, and some of this I think is there are some challenges we could get after straight away, but it is that balance of risk, balance of priorities. When we go to sort of the UOR situation, the risk appetite does change in government. And people are willing to place contracts very, very quickly, but equally are willing to make mistakes. We're seeing in the COVID inquiry the same sort of thing. Government had to go and act. And yes, they made some mistakes, they made some successes. And those things change when suddenly we swap to a proper sort of operational tempo.
And sorry, just on the UOR thing, just to come back on that, as you'll be aware from previous services, the issue with the UOR type approaches is the whole issue of bringing it back into core.
Yes.
They're done to do a very specific solution for a very specific problem. Then trying to integrate them with information systems and allied specifically becomes very, very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where there are a number of paces of change. So there's absolutely that pacing threat, but equally there's a longer term program where you've got to take that more holistic view. Absolutely.
I guess, it depends. You might not just be talking about the UR approach in its per se in terms of it being an urgent need and that issue of bringing it back into core, but what can we learn from those kind of rapid acquisition processes if we are fighting, in a high threat environment against an operational need? I think, if I look to our US partners, for instance, they have ways of rapidly pulling through R&D into acquisition that, are not mechanisms that are necessarily feasible today or exist within the UK system, but what can we learn from those? Hopefully we're learning from those other approaches. I think just a point on risk as well and buying in existing solutions, I guess it all comes down to what we're actually buying those particular solutions for. And there's been a huge amount of discussion this year about capability and resilience, I would call it. And if, we're just buying something because we want access to it quickly, then that's one thing. If we're buying something because we want a UK national capability or to provide resilience across allied nations, then that's perhaps a different angle. And we heard about the highly assured capabilities list that's been published. That gives us a pretty clear-eyed view about what kind of capabilities the UK really wants to hold on shore, some of which don't exist today, which is a good steer as well.
Mark, what's your perspective on this?
I don't really have that much to add. I think one thing that I would say, and I'm going to make the sort of carry-on cry from the SME perspective, is that there are things that are happening in SME technology world that we know government wants, and I can think of a few, and it is fantastically difficult to get government engaged. And I'll give you an example. Hypersonics is, we know this is an area of real interest at the moment. Very, very difficult to get engaged in it. So, and that is a risk-based issue, in my view.
Okay, thank you. Another question's coming through, very popular. The success of Serapis was highlighted. Can Dstl explain why it had virtually no funding into 23-24?
So the success of
Serapis.
I think I'm not sure about the commercial arrangement for Serapis, but I thought the ceiling on Serapis was lifted in terms of the budget available. I'd have to go back to our commercial office to verify that, or through BAE systems, so I don't think I can answer that from a commercial perspective.
Okay, thank you. Another question that's come through from Paul Mason. What kind of institutions or organisational structures would be the best forum for collaboration, and how do our competitors do it? Do you want to take that one, Mike?
That's a pretty difficult question in terms of the ways in which we collaborate. I guess it comes back to that point I made earlier about the what drives the pace of collaboration. And quite often we find ourselves waiting for government to release their requests, their asks about what they're after to try and understand that. And that really drives us forward in terms of how we want to build collaboration to kind of answer those specific needs. But until you get to that stage of understanding what the end requirement is, it would be quite difficult to kind of put those teams together. So I think working as early as possible with government, with MOD, to understand specifically what they're after, that allows us to then look at, okay, what kind of technologies is this going to require? What kind of solutions is this going to need? Will help us kind of shape how we put those those teams and those solutions together in the future. In terms of structures that can bring it together, we already heard about things like the Space Partnership, for instance. Now, that isn't a commercial vehicle to deliver any of these solutions, but it's those kind of open discussions about roadmaps, about where we want to go in the future, that brings together expertise from government and industry that can really help. I guess the challenges, and I think I saw Joanna here today, is kind of the challenges, okay, that's really great, but how do you take that to the next stage as well and start delivering against some of those priorities?
Okay, thank you. Matt, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, you'll remember from your previous life, we'd actually looked at different models of collaboration about how we might do the space programs. And there are different models across government. For example, one I've had a lot of success with is Missile Defence Centre. It's how industry and government collaborate in almost an equal contribution share to understand the issues of missile defence. You've got Team HRSA from a directed energy perspective, Tempest looking at different models of collaboration. So the models are there. They're very different in how they're focused and how they're approached. And I think they're much more bounded than space. So I think at the end, we looked at some different design options for how we take it forward. And those models weren't necessarily appropriate, but they could be looked at in future as the enterprise matures going forward.
Okay, thank you. Healthy competition for contracts should be the norm, but does industry accept that there are occasions when single source procurement may be necessary? David?
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen that through procurements both in the UK and across the globe. There's always a competition gets certain things certain times, but there's always a case for sole source for certain capabilities. We've seen, and I think Matt sort of mentioned some of them, if we look across MOD at the moment, things like the complex weapons pipeline, national shipbuilding strategy, there are certain things which are linked to national capabilities, assured capabilities, which may need to go sole source. There are other areas where actually there's a really healthy industry base in the UK and globally where we can compete. To me, it's very much horses for courses. We shouldn't always jump to competition. We should consider all of the options out there. And equally, there are procurement routes with allies, where we might be better to go down an allied procurement approach, where we all compromise a little bit to get something because we can put more funds, more resources against a requirement. So it's very much, you've got to be open to them all.
Your perspective?
I mean, I probably agree pretty much with what David said, and I think it's, absolutely there are strong occasions and reasons why going single source for something makes complete sense. I mean, it comes back to the point I reflected on from Alice. Actually, there was another point made at the UK Space Conference about an urgent and pressing need in some cases to for government to look at, okay, who is the best team to deliver against this particular requirement? But equally, that's got to be balanced against open procurement for other parts of the system. And I think when it comes to the Dstl side of the house on R&D and science and technology, for instance, looking at the whole range of solutions, gives government an idea of what's actually possible and those kind of options. But when it comes to delivering operational capability, and we heard Mark's talked about bringing SMEs on board, etc. You mentioned the hypersonic program, for instance, and I've got absolutely no doubt that there are some really great technologies coming from small and medium-sized companies that can deliver, whether it's hypersonic detection or other parts of that program. I think the notion that a small or medium-sized company is going to be delivering a hypersonic detection system for MOD on its own, I think that's probably something that's going to be pretty unlikely and would carry a huge amount of risk. So I think for some of these larger programs where we're trying to deliver an end-to-end operational capability, no one company is going to be able to do it on their own. Even within Airbus, I talked about our community for space prosperity we're putting together and what we're doing in Stevenage. Again, it's recognising the need to bring the best of breed technologies together, whether within our own supply chain or within the community.
And kind of on that point, Lewis Danborough has sent through a question. How would the panel overcome the challenge of navigating a route to bring novel innovations useful to defence that haven't been outlined in requirements? Is there a danger that if you don't fund these new innovations that you could potentially get shut out further down the line?
I think we've got to always be really alive to really disruptive technologies coming in from left field. And, I think, all companies and in government have ways of scanning the horizon, being involved in things like Seraphim Space Camp, for instance, which look in early seed stage investment funds, or working through the Space Agency or NASA as another great mechanism for unearthing these innovations. And I guess it's making sure that we are able to share what some of those things are and start to look at the implications of some of these disruptive technologies. And it's incumbent on all of us to be open-minded about that, I think.
David?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Mike. I mean, as a large company, we're constantly looking for new technologies, new capabilities, new services. And equally, it's incumbent on us to lead industry in certain areas. So the work we're doing on space logistics, which is servicing satellites on orbit, we're leading industry panels on that to try to grow the market. It's not about trying to lock it down and monopolize. It's trying to grow a new market segment, new capabilities for the warfighters and for our customers.
Matt?
Yeah, for me, we have a history of investing quite in novel technology, low TRL type stuff. For me, it's about pull-through. It's about value death type stuff. And there was a comment in the first panel that said the perception of space is that it's difficult. It is. You need to get to Mach 8 in a hardened radiation vacuum. It's difficult if you want to do TRL-6. You can't just bolt a piece of armour to a tank, test it on Salisbury Plain, bring it back and make it better. So I think defence has to do a better job on offering technology demonstration opportunities, in-orbit demonstration opportunities. We did it in the 90s. We did it on the civil side through Tech Demo Sat. I think we can offer something like that in the future to pull through. And that's a really powerful message for small and medium enterprises. If you have a defence contract and you have an opportunity to get flight heritage, that's a very powerful leg up for SMEs.
Okay, so leg up for SMEs. Mark, is that a leg up you can take?
Great to hear. As and when and if it happens, then there is a smorgasbord of technologies that's in SMEs in the UK at the moment that will excite defence. I'm absolutely no doubts about it.
I'm going to finish on just a final question, which is, it's pretty popular. This optic is UK only, even by this panel with Airbus UK, Northrop Grumman UK on the panel. How will the UK space sector repair this optic with international industries? Do you think it needs to be repaired, first of all?
So I think I sort of tried to touch on that before. I mean, for me, the opportunity for industry in the UK is not just in the UK. The space market is global. The US will always spend far more than the UK does on space. We've seen it before. It's going to continue. So for me, it's about let's get out there and show the world-class capability from the UK to the other markets. And certainly at Northrop, that's what we're trying to do. We're building our global supply chain. It's not just focused on the UK or the US or the other countries we operate in.
Mike?
Come back to partnership. How can we partner to bring some of those best innovations, and marry those up with UK capability, and bringing that kind of joint approach, I think, is one way we can maybe accelerate and get ahead of some of the threats that we talked about earlier.
Okay, and from your perspective, Matt, is there too much of a UK focus?
I really like this question because I think I've got a really good answer for it, which is, as a programme, we currently have 30 different projects across 9 different memorandum of understanding within the Dstl programme, and industry is right at the heart of that. So whereas the technology might be difficult to have a conversation on an industrial basis internationally, certainly in governmental terms, we have 5 Eyes activities, we have 13 Eyes activities, we're doing new things with Japan and JAXA. So from a DOD, MOD, around the world perspective, Dstl and the industry people supporting Dstl are extremely well positioned internationally.
Thank you. And from an SME perspective, how broad are your horizons?
Very broad. I would say that the majority of our future customer base is overseas, and I would say that the majority of our supply chain, very sadly, is overseas, certainly by value. So, even as a very small organisation sitting in the middle of Norfolk, our horizons are pretty broad.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of your input to this panel. It's been great. Thank you for sending through all of the questions. It is all we have time for because we have another panel before lunch, but please do give a round of applause to Mark, to Matt, to Mike, and to David. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Thank you. Go out that way.